Hello there, and welcome to the Star Wars Guys YouTube channel. I am Master Paul,
And I am Mando on fire.
and the fourth is family. So, we saw, or rather, I saw, a interesting article that was being talked about today by the YouTube channel Justin is Lost. Now, I've been following Justin is Lost for a few months now. He is mostly a Star Wars rumor sort of channel, and he talked about this one article that we're going to bring up right now. This is an article from Inside the Magic called "Was Dave Filoni Actually Behind the Star Wars Sequels?" Posted, as you can see here below, on the 14th of this month, so about 3 days ago. So I think it's a fresh enough topic that we can talk about. Now, just a little bit of background about Dave Filoni before we get into this. Dave Filoni is, of course, the mastermind behind the highly successful Clone Wars show, the also highly successful Rebels show. He teamed up with Jon Favreau to create The Mandalorian, the single best Disney Star Wars show, in my opinion. And he's currently working on The Bad Batch, as well as an upcoming show about Ahsoka. And so a lot of people have sort of seen him as the true creative genius of Star Wars, the one that should be calling all the shots, especially when you combine him with Jon Favreau. But then we have articles like this. And I've already read this article. I already know what it says. Michael hasn't yet, so this will be sort of his reaction. And, well, let's just get into it. So I'll read a little bit, Michael, and then we'll get your reaction. So, what's Dave Filoni behind the Star Wars sequels? For most Star Wars fans today, their loyalty either lies with Lucasfilm President Kathleen Kennedy, who had to sign off on the divisive Disney sequel trilogy, or with Dave Filoni, the Mandalorian executive producer and Lucasfilm executive creative director, who is, to many fans, saving the Star Wars franchise. And just as a side note right here, an absolute priceless picture, Gina Carano and Kathleen Kennedy in the same picture. But I digress. But what if the divide between Kennedy and Filoni isn't as massive as many fans like to think it is? Although Filoni wasn't officially in an executive position at Lucasfilm until his quiet promotion mid-2020, he held a great deal of sway over the fandom thanks to his time working on animated series for The Clone Wars and Star Wars Rebels, long before pop culture sensation The Mandalorian even existed. There is no doubt that Filoni's opinion was taken into consideration in some capacity as the Star Wars sequels Episode 7, The Force Awakens, Episode 8, The Last Jedi, and Episode 9, The Rise of Skywalker, were in development. So we'll go ahead and pause there for a quick second, Michael. So what is your immediate reaction to all of that?
So I want to say it's very vague on exactly what his role was, for one thing, just because the article says that his opinion was taken into consideration, but we ought to think about
Yes.
how valuable is this opinion, just because, for one thing, it's not like he was the executive director or whatever the title would be for the movies, but without a doubt, given his expertise, he was taken into consideration.
Right. And I'd say just that much right there sounds pretty harmless. But it's when we get a little bit deeper into the article that, at least to me, it causes a little bit of concern. So let's continue going. As a matter of fact, Filoni himself confirmed that he did some character development with the Lucas Story Group. Last year, Reddit user Darth Vadir, I'm guessing I said that right, posted a photo of a page from Doug Chiang until I can't even pronounce that last name, Phil's book, The Art of Star Wars, The Rise of Skywalker, in which Filoni spoke about helping to create character arcs for the legacy characters, specifically Princess General Leia Organa Solo, of course, played by Carrie Fisher. And then a picture, I can't do that in, but a picture of the quote. But the quote drive down here. So, Filoni said in this book, quote, "We should shift it so Leia is the Obi-Wan of this entire trilogy," being the sequel trilogy. "I don't even think that it hurts that she's not primarily that mentor figure in Episode 7, like John Knoll had been saying. The audience expectation is so on Luke, of course, Luke Skywalker, and when that proves not to be true, it's way more powerful. It's dangerous because it makes it so about the women of Star Wars." Speaking of both Leia and Rey, something to me says that's right. Now, I don't know how you heard that quote, Michael, but to me, here's how I interpret that. Dave Filoni was behind the idea of diminishing Luke Skywalker's role in the sequel trilogy against audience expectations in order to elevate Leia. And frankly, this is just another case. I know he said that Rian Johnson was the one that was always about subverting expectations just for the sake of subversion, but it sounds like Dave Filoni, at best, is just parroting what Rian Johnson did, or at worst, he himself thought that was a good idea. And I believe oftentimes the easiest way to do something is just do it the way that most makes sense. Yes, the audience expectation is going to be on Luke being, for, as Dave said here, the Obi-Wan of the trilogy, if you're going to make it about passing it on to the next generation. So if the audience's expectation is there, it's way easier and way less risky to just do what the audience expects. Now, yes, there's all about taking risks, and sometimes those risks pay off. But in the case of the sequel trilogy, for many longtime fans, this was a risk that clearly did not pay off. What do you think, Michael?
So, this is actually very interesting. Now, obviously, this isn't what we got in the long run, but it's almost like Filoni, almost to play devil's advocate, was almost taking a nod to anyone who was paying close enough attention in Last Jet and the Return of the Jedi, when they noticed that somehow Leia sensed Luke being okay, but I'm not really sure what to think of this so far.
Yeah, and then another thing too, if you want to make, now this is, I'm remembering a quote from, I forget what this book's name is called, like the Star Wars Archives or something. It's this big red book that has a bunch of interviews from George Lucas, including a little bit of what his episodes 7, 8, and 9 would look like. And he mentioned that for him, that episodes 1 through 3 were about the father. Episodes 4 through 5 and 6 were about the son. And episodes 7, 8, and 9 would be about the daughter. And maybe that's what Dave Filoni had in mind when he said that. I'm willing to give him the benefit of the doubt on that. But there's ways to make the sequel trilogy about the daughter or about a female character without making the men characters utterly incompetent, which is exactly what they did in the sequel trilogy. Now let's continue on. Filoni has always been keenly in tune with the women of Star Wars. He even developed Ahsoka Tano with George Lucas. So it's certainly interesting to get a take on how the sequels were intended to be received, even though that clearly didn't play out the way he, presumably the story group, planned. Recently, another Reddit thread has surfaced in which Star Wars fans discuss exactly how much control they believe Dave Filoni had over the sequel trilogy. The original poster, a user going by Your Best Friend Shane, wrote, "This is a real-world movie-making analysis. I'm interested in more information. How much input did Dave Filoni and the story group by itself have in the sequel trilogy? Do we know much of his stance on them? Does he have a favorite, least favorite? Is he interested in adapting them to the galaxy, or does he prefer to push back? Not that I believe he does, but that's what certain theories postulate. I think it's be good to speak on the material we have and put it all out here for the clarification. As a Redditor going by Corvdog recently pointed out that Filoni is seemingly filling in whatever bits of the sequels that he didn't like with his latest projects, both in Jon Favreau's The Mandalorian saga and his own animated show, Star Wars The Bad Batch. And he says, I'm not sure about his involvement with the sequels, but it sure does look like he is adding more backstory to the movies. It's almost like the new movies jumped too far ahead and left a lot incomplete. That's a lot of story for him to tell. I.e., what was Luke doing? We saw him take Grogu. Palpatine and Snoke cloning. First Grogu, then Omega. Don't think Thrawn Rebels lines up with the sequels, but he could set something up. Probably see that in the Ahsoka series. I know a lot of people do not like the new movies, but that's the story that has been written. Just fill in the story. So, there. So, Michael, again, what is your immediate reaction to that?
Well, I would almost say what his intentions for the time being are to kind of add in what stories that he wasn't able to tell. But we can honestly say that if Dave Filoni was more involved than what he was within the sequels, then I'm sure that the sequels could have turned out a lot differently.
Yes. So, continuing, another commenter whose name Roger Sterling pays homage to AMC's Mad Men shares many details from the Art of Star Wars series. Filoni was very involved in the overall arc, as was the rest of the Lucasfilm story group. It's all documented in the Art of books, which are great because they chronicle meetings going all the way back to 2012. They actually use a lot of Lucas's character outlines too, even though his other elements were scrapped. Kira from Lucas's original storyline becomes Rey. The Jedi Killer from Lucas's original storyline becomes Kylo Ren. And Dark Luke from Lucas's original storyline comes to life in The Last Jedi, to name a few. Some highlights from the story group call out in the books. The idea for Rey to adapt the Skywalker moniker dates back to a story group meeting from 2014 with Kiri Hart, Dave Filoni, and John Knoll. They misspelled it there. There is Dark Luke concept art approved by George Lucas in 2013, where he has dark circles around his eyes and looks like a hungover, I don't know who that is. I think that's some sort of Japanese character. There are great quotes from Filoni on why Luke has isolated himself and gone to this dark place of retreat, including the Frodo quote mentioned here. What Frodo quote? I don't see what. Anyways, they also chronicle how the story group and the screenwriters evolved the story. You learn how the Jedi Killer originally corrupted Han Solo and Leia's child, and eventually they merged the two characters together. This isn't to say that someone's opinion of the trilogy is right or wrong, but the story was heavily involved in the broad strokes and the overall story, which I think we kind of already knew. And then, let's see, how much more of this is? Okay. I'll keep reading. SteelGear117 holds the opinion that Filoni's thoughts may have been taken into consideration, but at the end of the day, Kennedy and directors J.J. Abrams probably had the most control over the Star Wars series. Not as involved as certain subs will pretend he was. He was part of an advisory / opinion group made up of Lucasfilm veterans, Doug Chang, John Knoll, people like that, and they had several set visits and at least one meeting with the story group. But the key was that for all intents and purposes, this group had no power and, at least with JJ, were rarely listened to. Rumor has it he did not like the story group interfering with The Force Awakens, and his return in The Rise of Skywalker was conditional on no outside interference, which seems true considering how many lore inconsistencies that film created. Filoni, excuse me, Filoni has been very open about the fact he had virtually no involvement besides visiting the set of The Last Jedi, which Rian Johnson, I think, confirmed that. He had no say whatsoever in the story, characters, or plot, and you can tell since the sequel trilogy feels so disconnected and out of sync with the rest of the saga. So we'll go ahead and stop there for a minute. Actually, no. Yeah, we will. So this person, this quote that we just read here, is an opposing view to the last two that we had, because the last one said that, yeah, he was involved a lot, and he was, involved in creating these story arcs for the sequel trilogy. But then this one's saying, no, he wasn't. He was part of an advisory group that basically talked to JJ and Ryan, and that ultimately the ball drops with Kathleen Kennedy, and Dave and his group weren't really listened to. So I guess, Michael, my question here is, which side of this argument do you think is closest to the truth? Keeping in mind, of course, that we don't know who any of these Redditors are. These could be insiders. They could also be random people. So objectively, which one do you think skirts closer to the truth?
Well, as you said before, there's at least two inconsistencies within these arguments, where one of them seems to be saying, oh, Dave was actually very actively involved, whereas the other side is saying, oh, he really wasn't, he was just part of an advisory. So just due to the lack of some sort of consistencies, I would say that maybe the latter was more accurate, and the fact that he wasn't actively involved is the truth.
Right. Though at the same time, that quote from Dave Filoni himself that I read all the way here, how we should shift it so Leia is the Obi-Wan of this entire trilogy, actually printed book. So he did say that. Now, did he mean it when he said it? Or could he have just been saying something? Or could he have meant it then, but now change his mind? Because that's another thing that this Justin Is Lost video mentioned, that yes, it is true that Dave Filoni was involved in the sequel trilogy and likely agreed with a lot of the things that the sequel trilogy did, but having now worked with Jon Favreau and seeing Jon Favreau's point of view about giving the fans what they want, perhaps he's changed his mind. The sequel trilogy started in 2012, and it's now 2021. That's enough time for people to completely change their outlook on things. And we're going to wrap up saying this. This last opinion perhaps is closest to the truth. And this is, of course, the author's opinion here. While no fan will ever know precisely what went on behind closed doors while the sequel trilogy was being developed, and characters like Rey, Finn, and Poe were being brought to life, it is safe to say that Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, to some extent, are working hard to fill in plot holes, bringing brand new meaning to a trilogy that disappointed so many. Next up in the Star Wars universe for Filoni and Mandalorian's showrunner Jon Favreau are The Mandalorian Season 3, The Book of Boba Fett, and Ahsoka. A third Mandalorian spinoff, Rangers of the New Republic, is no longer in active development following Gina Carano's firing from the Star Wars franchise. Now, one thing I want to bring up, I wanted to bring it up earlier, but I feel like now is a good way. This quote right here, it is safe to say that Dave Filoni and Jon Favreau, to some extent, are working hard to fill in plot holes, bringing brand new meaning to a trilogy that disappointed so many. What if they're not doing that? What if you believe the rumor videos, they're actually working to retcon the sequel trilogy out of relevance? What if they're looking to tell their own story outside of the sequel trilogy and relegate the sequel trilogy to an alternate universe? Doomcock has posted videos about this. Justin Is Lost has posted videos about this. You can Whether you choose to believe them or not is up to you. But just say, for example, but it's not impossible that they could do it. So I guess two questions to end on this one, and we'll both answer this one. So question number one, Michael, do you believe what this article is saying about them filling in plot holes to the sequel trilogy and keeping it in canon? Or do you think it's more likely that they would tell their own story and retcon the sequel trilogy out of relevance?
Well, I can honestly see that it can go either way. I think it's too soon to say, just because there are certain details in The Mandalorian that do point to the sequels, such as Grogu's force healing and the possibility of cloning, especially within the season 2 of The Mandalorian.
Very true. And that's about where I am too, because yes, there are things in The Mandalorian that do sort of allude to the sequel trilogy. But at the same time, if Jon Favreau and Dave Filoni had the wherewithal to give us, prime Jedi Master Luke at the end of season 2 of The Mandalorian, knowing how the fans would react to that, I think they would know exactly how fans would react if they find out that these shows indeed are tying to the sequel trilogy. And then the final question I'll ask is this: even if everything this article said about Dave Filoni is true, and I'll go ahead and get rid of the article now, even if all of that is true, that he did have a lot to do with the sequel trilogy and why it was the way it was, specifically with this idea of it being about the women of Star Wars, does that mean that we lose all hope in Dave Filoni? And I'll go ahead and answer this one first. And I'm going to say, for me, because everyone has their own opinion on this, but for me, no, it does not mean that. Because look at his body of work. The good very much outweighs the bad. For every bad sequel trilogy movie, there are dozens of good Clone Wars and Rebels and Mandalorian episodes to make up for it. So yes, his record is not flawless, but it's still a very impressive record, to be sure. What do you think?
Well, now that you say that, I want to say this is actually nothing new that he's done, because the article clearly states that he created the character Ahsoka, who was at first supposed to be written off as a snobby little teenager, but we get to see her grow up into the young woman that we know. But not only that, but he also extended on characters such as Padme Amidala to make her less of Anakin's love interest in some occasions and more so of her own character.
Yeah, and to continue that idea further, and this will be the idea that we end on. Even if it is the plan to keep the sequel trilogy canon and just fill the plot holes in, Dave Filoni has the talent to basically take crap and turn it into something good. That, in many fans' eyes, is what he did with the prequels and certain aspects of the prequels that they don't like. For example, Hayden Christensen's Anakin is made up for by Matt Lantor's Anakin. He took Ahsoka. Starting out, there was quite a few fans that didn't like Ahsoka. I'll be honest, I was not one of them. I liked Ahsoka from the beginning, but many people didn't like her. And now Ahsoka is many people's favorite Star Wars character. So it's not completely impossible that Dave Filoni could choose to keep the sequel trilogy canon if he has that sort of power and just work around it to at least try to make something better. And in some ways he may succeed, but in others, I don't know. We'll see. But I think that's going to be where we go ahead and end this video. So thank you guys for watching. This video actually turned out to be a little bit longer than we had thought, but please make sure to hit like and subscribe if you haven't already. I do have one quick announcement to make, though. Michael and I have talked, and we have decided to move our Sunday stream to Tuesday nights because we wanted to keep Sundays available to be able to spend time with our whole family, especially since our sister is going to be going back to college in a few weeks. We want to spend as much time with her as we can. So tentatively, we're going to say that streams are not, that weekly planned streams are going to be held Tuesday nights at around 8 p.m. That allows Michael and I both time to get off work, even if we're working the late shift. So we hope to see you guys there. And as always, the Force is family. Thank you very much.